In the end, when everything else fades away, only the lessons remain. Watch our cinematic reflections on life, love, loss, and the beauty of starting over again. Hit subscribe now to join us on this beautiful journey of reflection.
Me. At my husband's company anniversary gala, his sister stood up in front of 200 guests, raised her champagne glass, and announced that my husband and his 26-year-old associate were beginning a beautiful new chapter together. She looked directly at me when she said it. Then she smiled. I didn't move, I didn't cry. I sat at that table in my burgundy evening dress with my hands folded in my lap, and I smiled back at her. Because I had learned something in 11 years of marriage to Marcus that Beverly never understood about me. I don't fall apart in public. I fall apart later, privately, in the car, where no one can see. And then I put myself back together and I figure out what actually happened. What actually happened that night turned out to be far more complicated than I ever imagined. And Beverly, who had orchestrated the whole thing with the precision of someone who had been planning it for months, had no idea that she had just made the worst mistake of her life. Let me go back to the beginning, because the beginning matters. Marcus and I met when I was 25 and he was 28. He was building his company from scratch, a financial consulting firm he'd started with 2 college friends and a maxed-out credit card. I was working in marketing at the time, and a mutual friend introduced us at a dinner party. We were married 3 years later in a small ceremony in Vermont. 40 guests, nothing fancy, because we were putting every spare dollar back into the business. Those early years were hard in ways I don't think either of us fully appreciated until they were over. There were months when I carried us on my salary alone. There were nights Marcus slept on the office couch because he was too exhausted to drive home. There were arguments about money, about time, about priorities, about whether we had made the right choices. We came out the other side of those years with something I believed was real. A partnership built on sacrifice and trust, and the knowledge that we had held each other up when everything else was uncertain. By the time the company hit its 10th anniversary, Marcus's firm had 60 employees and a client list that included 3 Fortune 500 companies. We had a house in Connecticut, 2 golden retrievers, and a life that looked, from the outside, like exactly what we had worked toward. I was proud of him. I was proud of us. Beverly had never been part of that story. She was Marcus's older sister by 4 years, and she had joined the firm 5 years ago after her second divorce left her financially unstable. Marcus had given her a senior operations role out of loyalty, not merit, and I had accepted that because she was his family and family mattered to him. What I had not accepted, and had never been able to fully articulate to Marcus in a way he would hear, was that Beverly had spent those 5 years treating me like a temporary fixture in her brother's life. She was polite when she had to be. She was dismissive every other time. She had a particular talent for making me feel like an outsider in rooms I had helped build. Nicole joined the firm 8 months before the gala. I learned about her the way I learned about most things at the company. Peripherally, through Marcus's offhand mentions at dinner. We brought on a new associate, Nicole. She's sharp. Then, a few weeks later, Nicole flagged something interesting in the Henderson account. Then later, in a tone that had shifted almost imperceptibly, Nicole thinks we should restructure the way we're handling the quarterly reviews. I noticed the shift, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Marcus had always talked about work at dinner. He talked about everyone at work. What changed was Beverly. Beverly began mentioning Nicole to me directly, which she had never done with any other employee. She would call me on a Tuesday morning for no apparent reason and work Nicole's name into the conversation within 5 minutes. Nicole was at the client dinner last night. She really knows how to hold a room. Or, I saw Nicole and Marcus working late again. They have such incredible chemistry when it comes to strategy. She delivered these comments in a tone of complete neutrality, as if she were simply sharing information, as if she were not watching my face for a reaction. I gave her nothing. But I started paying attention. 6 weeks before the gala, I came to the office to surprise Marcus for lunch. His assistant told me he was in a meeting and offered to let me wait in his office. I sat in the chair across from his desk and noticed, on the corner of his desk, a folder I had never seen before. It was labeled with a client name I didn't recognize. I would not have thought anything of it except that the folder was sitting on top of Marcus's personal planner, not filed away, not on the shared drive where all client materials were supposed to live. It was on his desk, in his private office, in a way that said he had been looking at it recently. I did not open it, but I took a photograph of the label with my phone before Marcus walked in. I did not tell Marcus what I had seen. I told him lunch was wonderful and I kissed him goodbye in the lobby, and that evening, after he fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop and searched the client name from the folder. The company did not exist. Not in any public registry, not in the state business filings, not in any database I could access. There was a website, sparse and recently created, but when I ran it through a domain lookup, it had been registered 14 months ago to a holding company with a P.O. box address in Delaware. I wrote down everything I found and closed the laptop and went to bed. I said nothing to Marcus. The following week I hired a private accountant, a woman I found through a friend of a friend, someone with a background in financial forensics. I gave her only what I had, the company name, the website, the Delaware holding company, and I told her I needed to understand what I was looking at. She called me back 4 days later and told me she needed more time. She also told me the P.O. box address in Delaware was connected to 2 other holding companies, and that one of those companies had a registered officer whose name I would know. The name was Beverly. I sat with that for 2 days before I allowed myself to process what it meant. Then I processed it very carefully. Beverly was a senior operations officer at the firm. She had access to client billing, to vendor accounts, to the firm's financial infrastructure in ways that most employees did not. If she had created shell companies and was routing money through them, she had been doing it from inside the firm, using her access, possibly for years. The folder on Marcus's desk, the one with the non-existent client name, was connected to one of her companies. Whether Marcus knew about it or not, I couldn't yet tell, but I knew Beverly knew. I also knew, now, exactly why Nicole had joined the firm 8 months ago. I made a phone call I probably should have made weeks earlier. A former colleague of mine had moved into corporate compliance work, and over dinner one evening I described the situation in deliberately vague terms and asked her what it would look like if a firm like Marcus's had a compliance issue that warranted outside scrutiny. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "It would look like a quiet hire that nobody fully explained." I asked her what that hire would actually be doing. She said, "Following the money." I drove home and sat in my driveway for 20 minutes. Nicole wasn't Marcus's girlfriend. Nicole was inside that firm for a reason that had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with Beverly. And Beverly, who was smart but not as smart as she believed, had figured out why Nicole was really there, which was why she had spent 6 weeks casually dropping Nicole's name into my ear, planting a seed, trying to use me as a tool to discredit Nicole before Nicole could finish what she came to do. If I caused a scene about my husband's relationship with a company associate, Nicole's position at the firm would become untenable. The investigation would stall. Beverly would have more time. The gala was her accelerant. The event was held at the Westfield Grand, a hotel ballroom that had been booked 8 months in advance. 200 guests, Marcus's clients, his partners, the firm's board of directors. Beverly had organized the event herself, as she had done every year, and she had controlled every detail of the evening, including the seating arrangements and the program. I had not been involved. I had been told it was handled. I arrived with Marcus and stood beside him through 2 hours of cocktails and conversation, and the particular exhaustion of being the founder's wife in a room full of people who want something from your husband. Marcus was in his element. He was warm and confident, and he moved through the room with the ease of someone who had spent a decade building exactly this kind of trust. I watched Beverly work the room differently. She was efficient. She was placing herself at specific tables, speaking to specific people, and I could see her eyes tracking the room with a focus that had nothing to do with celebrating 10 years of a company. Nicole was there. I had seen her photograph on the company website, but seeing her in person was different. She was composed in a way that read as professional rather than social, and when she spoke to people her attention was complete, unhurried. She did not look like a woman having an affair with her boss. She looked like someone doing a job. Beverly made her move during the formal portion of the dinner, between the main course and dessert, in the 15-minute window when the microphone was open for toasts. She had clearly arranged this. The first 2 toasts were standard. A board member, then one of the original founding partners, and then Beverly stood up. She began with the company history, the founding story, Marcus's vision. She was poised and she was good, and the room was with her. And then she pivoted, still perfectly calm, still smiling, and she said that Marcus had found not only professional success but a new personal inspiration in the people around him. She said that certain connections went beyond business. She said that she believed the next chapter of the firm would be shaped by Marcus and Nicole, that their partnership represented something she was proud to witness. She raised her glass. Half the room raised theirs without fully understanding what they had just been asked to toast to. The other half looked at each other uncertainly. I did not raise my glass. Marcus turned to look at me, and his expression was not the expression of a man who had been caught. It was the expression of a man who had confused. He reached for my hand under the table, and I let him take it, and I kept my eyes on Beverly, who was sitting back down now with the satisfied composure of someone who had just detonated something and was waiting to see the smoke. I said, quietly, so only Marcus could hear, "Don't say anything tonight. Let me handle this." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. The evening ended without incident. I spoke to people. I thanked the caterers. I complimented Beverly on the event and watched her eyes narrow very slightly at my tone, searching for the reaction she expected and not finding it. I shook hands with the board members, and I made note of which ones were leaving together and which ones were pulling out their phones. In the car on the way home, Marcus started talking immediately. He said nothing had happened with Nicole, that Beverly had acted on her own, that he didn't understand why she would do this. He was upset. I believed him that nothing had happened. I also knew this moment required care. I said, "I need you to trust me for 2 weeks. I need you to go to work, behave exactly as you normally would, and don't confront Beverly. Not yet." He said, "Sarah, she humiliated you in front of." I said, "I know, and she's going to face consequences for it that will matter a lot more than a confrontation, but not yet. Can you give me 2 weeks?" He agreed. He was unsettled by my calm, I could tell. He had expected tears or anger, something he knew how to respond to. What I was giving him instead was something he wasn't sure how to read. The following morning I called my financial forensics contact and told her I needed everything she had, and I needed it in a format that could be given to someone official. She said, "How official?" I said, "As official as it gets." There was a pause. Then she said, "Sarah, I need to tell you something. I've been in contact with the compliance division of the SEC regarding this matter for the past 3 weeks. The investigation is already in motion. What I found goes beyond what you initially described." I asked her to tell me. The shell company structure Beverly had built was connected to a client billing scheme that had been running for approximately 3 years. Invoices for non-existent services were being routed through her companies and paid out of client retainer accounts. The total amount was in the range of $2.3 million. Beverly had been careful. The individual amounts were small enough to avoid automatic flagging, spread across dozens of accounts over time. But once you knew the structure, the pattern was unmistakable. Nicole had mapped it entirely. She had been placed inside the firm by the board's outside compliance counsel after a routine audit 2 years ago raised small irregularities that nobody had been able to trace. Nicole had a background in forensic accounting and had done similar embedded work twice before at other firms. She had needed 8 months to build the complete picture because Beverly was genuinely careful. She was almost finished. Beverly's public stunt at the gala had not just been an attempt to use me to discredit Nicole. It had also been a message. Beverly knew Nicole was close, and she was trying to create enough chaos to buy herself time to exit. If Nicole's position at the firm became publicly associated with a personal scandal, the embedded investigation would have to pause while the firm dealt with the fallout. Beverly would have moved money. Beverly would have had options. She had miscalculated on one detail. I was not going to cause chaos. Marcus needed to be told the truth, and I told him on a Thursday evening at our kitchen table with the documents my contact had prepared laid out between us. He was silent for a long time after I finished. He asked questions. I answered them. He went back to the beginning and asked more questions. I answered those too. When he had gone through everything, he sat back and said, "She's been doing this for 3 years. I said yes. He said, "While I was defending her to you, every time you said something fell off, I told you to give her a chance." I said, "I know." He closed his eyes briefly. Then he said, "What do we do now?" I told him that the SEC was going to move when Nicole completed her documentation, which he expected to do within the week. I told him the board's outside counsel was already aware. I told him that when it happened, it was going to be public, and the firm needed to be positioned as cooperative and transparent, not defensive. I told him he needed to call his own attorney before end of day tomorrow. He said, "Did you know about Nicole the whole time?" I said, "No, I figured it out about 3 weeks ago." He looked at me for a moment and then he said, "Why didn't you tell me then?" I said, "Because I needed to understand the whole picture first, and because I wasn't sure how much you knew." He heard that. He understood what I had not quite said. He nodded slowly and didn't ask me to apologize for it. Beverly was notified by the SEC on a Tuesday. Her attorney contacted the firm's counsel the same afternoon. She did not come to the office. She did not call Marcus. She sent a single text message to his personal phone that said, "I tried to protect the family." He showed it to me without comment. The formal charges were filed 3 weeks later. Federal wire fraud and securities fraud. The documentation Nicole had assembled was, by all accounts, comprehensive enough that Beverly's attorney had already begun cooperating conversations with prosecutors within 10 days of the initial notification. There was no ambiguity in the numbers. There was no version of events in which this had been an error. The board of directors released a statement through outside counsel acknowledging the situation and confirming the firm's full cooperation with the investigation. Marcus made the call to every major client personally in advance of the public filing to explain what had happened and what the firm was doing about it. It was the hardest week of his professional life, and I sat with him through every evening of it. 2 clients paused their relationships with the firm pending resolution. 3 others, including their largest account, sent written confirmation that they were staying. The Henderson Group, the family whose name I had seen on that folder on Marcus's desk, whose account had been one of the first identified in Nicole's report, called Marcus directly and told him that his handling of the situation had demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity that had brought them to the firm in the first place. Marcus cried after that call. He tried to hide it and then didn't. I sat next to him on the couch with my hand on his back and didn't say anything, because sometimes there is nothing to say, and presence is enough. Nicole left the firm quietly the week after the charges were filed. There was no announcement, no farewell. One day she was there, and the next she wasn't. Marcus told me that she had met with him briefly to close out her documentation, and that she had thanked him for his cooperation. He said she was professional and composed, and that he felt, in retrospect, he should have been paying closer attention to what was happening in his own house. I said, "You built something worth protecting. You trusted the people around you. That's not a flaw." He said, "Beverly was my sister." I said, "She still is. That doesn't change what she did." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You knew something was wrong before any of this." "For months." "How did you stay that calm?" I thought about the night of the gala, Beverly's glass raised high, her eyes on me, looking for the fracture. I thought about sitting across the table from her in that ballroom with my hands folded in my lap, while 200 people tried to understand what they had just witnessed. I thought about the drive home and the parking lot and the 2 days I had spent sitting with the knowledge about Beverly before I let myself feel it. I said, "I wasn't calm, I was strategic. There's a difference." He said, "Walk me through it." So I did. I told him about the folder and the photograph and the domain lookup and the call I made to my forensics contact. I told him about Beverly's phone calls to me, the way she had been working on me for weeks before the gala. I told him about sitting in the kitchen at 2 in the morning with my laptop while he slept. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You did all of that alone." I said, "I've been building things alone for a long time. I learned from the best." He looked at me for a long moment with an expression I recognized from our early years, from the hard years, the look he used to get when something surprised him in a way he hadn't anticipated. Then he said quietly, "I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to." That apology meant more to me than any of what came after. More than the clients who stayed, more than the board's vote of confidence, more than the morning 6 months later when Beverly's attorney announced a plea agreement that would result in restitution and a federal conviction. Those things were resolution. That apology was something older and more fundamental. It was the acknowledgement that I had been standing beside him all along, and that he had not always seen it. We didn't fix everything that night. You don't fix 11 years of accumulated small failures in a single conversation. But we started. Marcus brought Nicole into that firm as a compliance resource at the board's direction, and had genuinely not known the full scope of what she was investigating. His attorneys confirmed this, the SEC confirmed this, and I believed it independently because I knew my husband well enough to know that he was not, at his core, a man capable of the kind of sustained deception Beverly had demonstrated. He was capable of avoidance and denial, and the comfortable habit of trusting people he wanted to trust. Those are different failures, and they required different conversations, and we had them. Beverly's sentencing was 8 months after the initial charges. I did not attend. Marcus went, briefly, with his attorney. He said she looked smaller than he remembered. He said her attorney made arguments about the financial pressure she had faced after her second divorce, the desperation, the sense that the family business owed her something for the years she felt overlooked. Marcus said he listened and he felt grief, and he also felt very clearly that none of it was sufficient. He came home and sat in the kitchen, and I made dinner and we ate together and talked about other things. The dogs, the upcoming client trip, the renovation we had been planning for the back porch. We talked about ordinary things because ordinary life is what you protect when you fight for it, and we had fought for it in our own way, both of us, and we were still there. At one point he said, "She thought she could make you believe something that wasn't true and you'd do her work for her." I said, "She didn't know me as well as she thought she did." He said, clearly. There was a pause, and then I said, "She also didn't know that I had learned, 11 years ago, never to react until I understood the whole picture." He said, "Where did you learn that?" I said, "From watching you build a company. From watching you hold still under pressure until you knew where to move." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I should have been watching you." I looked at him across the kitchen table in our house in Connecticut, with the dogs sleeping on the floor between us and the evening light coming through the window, and I thought about 25-year-old me at a dinner party, and the man who had made me laugh and then made me think and then made me believe that something real was possible. I thought about the years since then, the full weight of them, the beautiful parts and the hard parts, and the parts that had tested everything. I said, "You're watching now." He smiled. It was the smile from the beginning, the one I had fallen for at a dinner party when I was 25, and he was 25, and he was 28, and neither of us knew yet what we were capable of. That, in the end, was what Beverly had tried to take from us and failed to understand could not be taken by someone standing outside it with a champagne glass. She had seen a marriage and thought she saw a weakness. What she had not seen was what the marriage was actually made of. The years before the money, the nights on the office couch, the mornings I held us together with my paycheck and my belief, and the version of my husband who had looked at me 11 years ago and seen someone worth building a life beside. She had not seen any of that, and so she had aimed at something she thought she understood and missed entirely. Some people mistake stillness for fragility. They see a woman sitting quietly with her hands folded in her lap, and they assume she is enduring. They don't consider the possibility that she is watching, that she has already taken a photograph, made a call, followed a thread, and is 3 steps ahead of everything happening in that room. I have been quiet my whole life in the particular way that people misread. I have let them misread it when it served me. Beverly spent 5 years underestimating me. She spent those same 5 years inside a firm I helped build, at a table I helped set, in a life that my work and my patience and my willingness to hold the harder parts quietly had made possible. She thought the gala was her move. She planned it carefully, and she executed it cleanly, and she sat back down in her chair with the satisfaction of someone who had started something she couldn't be blamed for. But I had already been in motion. I had been in motion for weeks, moving quietly, the way I had always moved, toward the truth, and then toward the people who needed to hear it. The weight of what Beverly had done, to Marcus, to the clients, to the employees who had no idea the ground beneath them had been quietly hollowed out. That weight landed on her fully, as it should have. Not because I pushed it there, because she had placed it there herself, over 3 years, one invoice at a time, and eventually weight like that finds its level. I just made sure no one was standing in the wrong place when it did.